Epithelium. Alright. Basically, epithelial tissue is very specialized cells that are going to cover or line something. Now, it's easy to think about the skin. You think about your skin as being a protective surface, which it is. But basically, we have a sheet of cells that are lined up together that are covering something. But the surface of your skin on your cheek is also going to cover the surface of your lips, the inside of your mouth. It's going to make its way all the way down your throat, through the stomach, the intestines. So all of that's also epithelial tissue too. It's also covering the surface or lining a cavity or a space inside. Okay? So we say that epithelial tissue has different functions based on where it is in the body. Now, it's easy to think of it as being a boundary, a protective surface, if you think about your skin, which is what epithelium does. But it can also do other things. We're talking about a boundary between things. So you can have a surface of something that's going to have to absorb something for you, either nutrients or gases. We may produce something in that particular tissue, and we've got to get it across the covering or the boundary. So then we're going to be secreting things. If we have waste products, we're going to excrete it through epithelium. We're going to use those particular types of cells to filter the blood in the kidneys. And there are sensory receptors in the epithelium too. Okay. Now, there are 5 special things that describe or help us understand epithelial cells and how they're different. And the first one is that they are polar. The 2 sides of these cells are different. So if you look at this surface versus this one, they're going to be shaped different and do different things. And of course, one of the most basic things to learn about epithelium is that they're at the edge of something. So up here is going to be our free surface. This is going to be either the outside part of your body, the exterior, or the inside of a space, like the stomach. So the top part of the cell is going to be a little bit different than the bottom. So the apical surface will be toward the free surface. The basal surface will be resting on other tissue. Now, on this picture, you see that they have these little finger-like projections. Those are called microvilli, and the purpose of those is to increase the surface area. Especially in places like the intestinal tract, we want to absorb food across this boundary. So we want as much space as possible, so we're going to fold that area of the cell into these little finger-like projections to increase the absorption rate. And those do not move. Their only purpose is to increase surface area. Now, the second thing about epithelial cells is they are tightly bound together. We've got a sheet of cells that are a boundary between things. So we want them tightly connected. And we do this by tight junctions. These are going to be like little protein connections between the cells that keep things from going or sliding in between the cells. We have desmosomes, which are these plaque-like formations. They have extensions that hold on to the cytoskeleton. It's going to help hold the cells together and also give the shape to the cells. Now, also, these epithelial cells are resting on connective tissue. They have to be supported by something else. These are a very thin layer of cells, so they're resting on connective tissue. And between those epithelial cells and the connective tissue is a membrane called the basal lamina. And when it fuses with the surface part of the connective tissue, we call that the basement membrane. So that is basically the base for these epithelial cells. Now, these cells are either one layer thick or just a few cells, so they're very thin. We don't really have room for blood vessels. So you're going to find our blood vessels are down here in the deeper layers in the connective tissue. So any nutrients that these living cells up here might need are going to diffuse upwards. Oxygen, nutrients are going to diffuse from these tiny blood vessels from the connective tissue into the epithelium. So we say that it is avascular. There are no blood vessels. Now, we all know that skin gets damaged very easily. You fall down, you get hurt. We've got to have the ability for those cells to regenerate really quickly. So all of our epithelial cells have the ability to reproduce by mitosis and create new cells very fast. And one of the best examples is inside your mouth. If you go to eat something, really crunchy chips or popcorn, have the ability to damage the inside surface of your mouth and slough off cells. You've got to be able to replace those quickly We don't want to starve to death. Now, we describe our cells by using two names. Each type of epithelium has a two-part name. First part's going to describe, is it one layer of cells or two layers? So the arrangement is being described. So the first is going to be a simple epithelium where there's just one layer of cells. The next is going to be layers and layers of cells stacked on top of each other, and we call that stratified. Now the second part of the name is referring to what shape the cell is. So the first one is called columnar, and they look like tall rectangles. The nucleus of the cell tends to be toward the basal surface. So remember, this would be the basement membrane, and this would be the free surface up here. The second type is the cuboidal, and they look like little round squares, rounded off squares with a central nucleus. And then we have the third type is squamous, and they look like flattened out cells with a central nucleus. They look like they have been squashed, and that's one way to think of it. Now I'm going to take you through each type of epithelial cell. The first are the simple squamous epithelium. Simple, of course, refers to the fact there's only one layer of cells. So if you look at this, we see one layer of cells. Squamous means that they're flattened. They're not columnar, they're not cuboidal, they are flattened out. Now when we're identifying epithelium, we want to focus first on our free edge or free surface. We find an area where there are no other cells, basically the edge or the boundary of something, because that's what epithelium does. It's a border, a boundary. So we look for that, then we try to find that basement membrane. That's where the epithelium is resting on. So there'll be a difference between the epithelial cells and the connective tissue below. So simple squamous epithelium, usually found in places where you want to get easy diffusion. It's very thin, so it's going to allow gas exchange to take place in the lungs. It's going to also be found inside of all those tiny little blood vessels. Now our second kind is simple cuboidal. Again, we want to find the free edge. That's going to be here. There's no cells here. Now this is like a tubule. It's some type of tube that's been cut in crossways. So when we're looking at these cells, we see the free edge, we see a basement membrane that their cells are resting on. Now we can make out a nucleus. Nuclei are going to stain darker. They're going to look like little round circles. So around that would be our individual cell. So he looks like a rounded cube, so he's cuboidal. We see the basement membrane, there's only one layer of cells, so it's a simple one. And usually these are found in areas where you want absorption and secretion. Now the next type are simple columnar cells. Again, simple meaning there's only one layer of cells. Again, we're going to focus on our free edge here. There's no cells up here. Here's our basement membrane that the cells are resting on. If you look at this cell, you can easily see that that is a columnar shaped cell. The nuclei is toward the basement membrane, a little bit lower in position. You can see the entire cell from the free edge all the way down to the basement membrane. Now these are usually found throughout the GI tract. They're involved in absorption and secretion. You're going to notice here, this is called a brush border, and this is actually microvilli. When you look at a real slide, the microvilli are so tiny, you can't make them out. You can't see the individual finger-like projections. All you're going to see is this brushy, fuzzy border. So that's our brush border, or microvilli. And again, they don't move. Goblet cells are producing mucus. Okay? They are considered a unicellular exocrine gland. They are present in between these columnar cells, and they're going to be producing mucus to help the food move faster and easier through the GI tract. Now, stratified squamous epithelium, obviously stratified meaning there's layers. We're looking at cells that are stacked on top of each other, so we know they're stratified. We know that here at the free edge, they are flattened out, so we say that they are squamous cells. Again, we're looking at our free edge. We see our basement membrane here at the bottom. Now, if you notice, the cells are larger here at the bottom. They're rounder. As they grow and produce more cells, they're going to flatten out as they get toward the surface. Now, a typical place that you'll see this will be on skin. So you're going to be seeing a lot of these as we look at skin in the future. Okay. Now, pseudostratified columnar epithelium, pseudo means false. So what we're looking at, first glance, you might think those are layers of cells, but in truth it's only one layer of cells. What's happening is we've got columnar-looking cells. Some of them are going to appear to look just like simple. You're going to see the whole entire cell. But every now and then you're going to see what looks like two nuclei. And what's happened is these are single cells, but some of them have leaned over a little bit so that you don't see the whole cell. So one of the tricks is to see nuclei at different levels. That's one description of pseudostratified. Now you're going to see cilia. These are different than microvilli. They're longer and they move. Now we're going to find pseudostratified within the respiratory tract, within our trachea. When we breathe in dust particles, bacteria. These goblet cells, we already know these can make mucus. They're going to produce the mucus, trap the dirt particles and the bacteria. Our cilia are going to move the mucus with the dirt up the respiratory tract until you can either cough them out or swallow them. Okay. All right. The next two, these are very rare types of cells. We don't see this as much, and usually we don't see these in the lab. But stratified cuboidal are simply layers of cuboidal cells. We find these in mammary and sweat glands. Stratified columnar cells, we find these in the male urethra and part of the pharynx. Now the last type is the transitional epithelium, and it doesn't use the traditional two-part name. Transition means that we go from one shape to another. So we're going to change our shape, basically. Now it's obvious when you look at this that these are definitely stratified. There's layers of cells here. Here's our free edge, right here. Here's our basement membrane. Now if we look at these cells, we see that they're all basically round, various sizes. But it has the ability to stretch out and make these cells really, really thin and pull out. And we want this in places where we need stretching, such as the urinary bladder and the ureters that lead to the kidneys. So when you look at normal slides in the lab, you're only going to see it in the relaxed state. So the way to identify this versus stratified squamous is to look at the free edge, see what those cells look like. And if they're rounded, then they must be transitional, because squamous are going to be flattened up at the surface. Now the last thing I want to talk about are glands. We know that epithelium is basically covering something, lining, protecting things, but some epithelial cells can produce and secrete things. So we call those glands, or glandular epithelium. And we have two types. We have endocrine secretion that's going to be producing hormones, and we produce these and secrete them straight into the blood vessels. This system is known as ductless. It has no tubes. Everything is directly into the bloodstream, and hormones such as insulin and growth hormone are transported throughout the body in this manner. Now the other type are the exocrine glands, and these types, they do use ducts. They're going to have cells that produce a particular product, and then they have tiny little tubes or ducts that are going to carry them either outside the body or into a body cavity. And some examples would be sweat glands, mammary glands. Well, thank you very much. That's all I've got on epithelial cells.